May 14, 1940, 5:12 hours, near Arras, northern France. The first artillery shells thudded into the soft, rain-slicked soil, sending tremors through the early morning mist. Hedgerows shivered under the shockwaves as pale fog clung to every ridge, curling like ghosts around the crumbling stone fences of farmland. A rooster crowed somewhere, but it was drowned by the distant roar of German engines and the sharp staccato of machine gun fire. Lieutenant Colonel George Sandy Robertson squinted against the half-light, the rising sun a dull orange smear behind low clouds. His breath steamed in the cold air. He could hear the hiss of the Matilda II engines as the British armored column lurched forward, their heavy tracks crunching over mud and broken stones. The tanks, slow and lumbering, looked almost comical compared to the sleek, mechanized phalanxes the Wehrmacht had unleashed. Yet behind Robertson's wary gaze lay a flicker of hope, a fragile ember in the face of the German Blitzkrieg. Alongside him, Sergeant Edward "Eddie" Hawkins clutched the radio handset, fingers numb, teeth chattering. The signal crackled with broken German chatter intercepted by British intelligence. The words were unintelligible at first, then sharp, urgent. "They are moving faster than expected," Hawkins whispered. "Divisions concentrated near Douai. They'll hit Arras in hours." His eyes darted toward the low hills, where dark silhouettes of Panzer IIs and Panzer IIIs rolled like predatory cats through the mist. Private James "Jimmy" Mallorie swallowed hard and checked his Sten gun. He had been a baker in Leeds before the war. Now a man sitting atop a steel behemoth, feeling the metal shiver under his hands. He had heard stories about these German tanks, the Panzers that could flatten villages and erase battalions. And here they were, looming closer, engines growling and guns glinting. The fear in the soldiers' hearts was thick, but there was no room for hesitation. Orders had come down. Hold the line, no matter the cost. The Matilda II tanks clanked into position along the ridgeline. Their 2-pounder guns were modest, their armor heavy, but their speed almost insulting to modern tactics. Officers whispered among themselves, skepticism etched on their faces. "These things won't stop the Panzers," muttered one captain, his voice low, almost lost in the mist. The men who had watched them roll out from their depot in England had laughed, seeing the squat frames and slow treads. Yet the ground underfoot told a different story. Every shell crater, every mud-slicked field was a potential battlefield, and the Matildas were about to learn their first real test. Then, without warning, the distant rumble of engines grew louder. The Germans were coming. Panzer columns emerged like shadows, weaving through the farmland with terrifying precision. Recon vehicles scouted ahead, their commanders shouting orders in rapid German, hands gesturing furiously. The sun caught on the black steel of their turrets, turning them into ominous beacons in the gray dawn. Sandy Robertson raised his binoculars, scanning the advancing Panzers. The field ahead was littered with abandoned farm carts and shattered hedgerows, the signs of previous skirmishes and hurried retreats. The wind carried the smell of gunpowder and wet earth. Somewhere behind him, an officer called out a last check on fuel, ammunition, and gun calibrations. The Matilda's engines growled in response, like nervous lions sensing the approach of a predator. The first shot fired was not from the Germans, but from a terrified British observation post. The shell exploded harmlessly in the mud, a signal that the line of Panzer divisions was within striking distance. Time slowed. Men gripped their weapons tighter. Engines idled, radios hissed, and fog rolled through the fields like a living creature. Every heartbeat seemed amplified in the silence that followed. And then it happened. The Matilda II, leading the formation, nicknamed Iron Duchess by its crew, fired its 2-pounder. The shell struck a Panzer I head-on. The Germans' laughable expectation of easy victory shattered in an instant. Smoke hissed, metal buckled, and a tank that had seemed slow, almost vulnerable, proved impossibly resilient. The Panzers behind it hesitated, their commanders exchanging startled glances. A ripple of disbelief ran through the Allied line. "Did you see that?" whispered Hawkins, voice trembling. It had just stopped one cold. Robertson tightened his jaw, eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. He knew this was the moment. The fragile line between fear and courage, between annihilation and defiance. The Germans were confident, mechanized perfection. The Matildas were underdogs. Yet now, in this mist-shrouded morning, the impossible was happening. The rest of the British column shifted forward. Engines roared. Steel tracks gouged the mud. The low-lying fog hid much of the battlefield, but the sounds of war, the crash of treads, the whistle of shells, the harsh bark of rifles, painted the scene more vividly than any binoculars could. Men shouted orders. Artillery crews adjusted aim. And every soldier knew the coming minutes would define the battle. Then a German Panzer commander, eyes wide, ordered a flank. The Panzers moved faster, a living wall of steel intent on crushing the Matildas. They were confident, relentless, unstoppable. Or so they thought. Robertson's hand rested on the hatch, feeling the vibrations of Iron Duchess. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Somewhere deep inside, he felt a strange calm, the clarity of a man staring into the eye of chaos and realizing what had to be done. He gave the order, "Advance!" The Matildas moved forward. Slow, steady, unyielding. Each track ripped through mud, each engine growl a challenge to the approaching storm. The Panzer column adjusted, and for a moment, time itself seemed to pause, the calm before the clash. And then the first direct hit from the Panzer guns roared across the field. Mud and shrapnel flew into the air. One Matilda lurched but stayed upright, its armor absorbing what would have destroyed a lesser tank. The Germans cursed. They had underestimated these machines. Private Mallorie gripped his seat, knuckles white. Sergeant Hawkins checked the radio frantically, relaying coordinates to artillery units hiding behind the ridges. Lieutenant Colonel Robertson's mind raced. Every calculation mattered: angle, distance, momentum. The battlefield was no longer theoretical. It was visceral, immediate, alive with the cries of men and the roar of engines. Somewhere in the chaos, a shell struck a nearby hedgerow, uprooting an oak tree and sending a shower of branches over the advancing Panzer. The mist mingled with smoke, the sun barely piercing the gray canopy, casting the battlefield into surreal chiaroscuro. Men ducked and shouted. Artillery crews aimed and fired, tanks clanked and growled. It was a war symphony, brutal and relentless. And in the center of it, the Matilda II, mocked, underestimated, ridiculed, advanced like a slow, implacable tide. Its crew's faces were set with grim determination, the human element beneath the steel unmistakable. Every decision, every maneuver, would ripple across the battlefield, and none of them knew yet how far this single line of tanks could push back the German juggernaut. The Panzer commanders exchanged orders frantically. Smoke and mud obscured visibility, but the Matildas remained visible targets, stubborn, resilient, almost unreal. Robertson's voice cut through the chaos over the internal comms. "Hold the line. Don't falter. Show them what British steel can do." The first round of the clash had passed. The Matildas had survived. The Germans had hesitated, and the men on both sides sensed that the ordinary rules of warfare might be rewritten in these misty fields near Arras. Somewhere in the distance, a Panzer commander muttered the word that no soldier wanted to hear. Impossible. The morning fog thinned just enough to reveal the advancing Panzer column. Dozens of tanks glinted darkly, their silhouettes moving like predators across the churned earth. The ground shuddered with each heavy tread, mud spattering over abandoned farm tools and shattered hedgerows. Robertson gripped the hatch of Iron Duchess, feeling the tremor of each German engine. Every man knew that hesitation could mean death. Every second counted. Targets on the left flank. shouted Sergeant Hawkins over the radio, voice sharp and urgent. The Matildas shifted in unison, a slow but deliberate pivot. Their tracks tore the sod, leaving deep ruts behind, and the armored hulls groaned under the strain. Private Mallorie's stomach churned, but he held fast to the hatch, eyes scanning for movement. He had trained for combat, drilled for discipline, yet nothing in Leeds had prepared him for the smell of wet metal, mud, and fear mingling in the air. The first direct engagement began when a Panzer III rolled into view. Its 37mm gun barked, sending a shell screaming toward the lead Matilda. Time dilated. Men flinched as mud erupted around the tank. The shell struck the side armor with a deafening clang. Sparks flew. Smoke hissed. Yet the Matilda did not budge. Its 78mm frontal armor had shrugged off the hit, as if mocking the Germans. Fire at will. Robertson's voice rang across the comms. Iron Duchess's 2-pounder gun swiveled and fired, a sharp crack splitting the dawn. The round struck the Panzer's turret, ricocheting off the steel. The German crew froze, then scrambled to adjust, shouting over the roar of engines and shellfire. Another round followed, then another, each hit precise, each impact unnerving the Panzers. Hawkins adjusted artillery coordinates, eyes scanning the ridge for signs of enemy movement. Every tree, ditch, and hedgerow could conceal a Panzer, a machine gun, a squad of riflemen. The mist gave the Allies a fragile advantage, masking the slow advance of their tanks while exaggerating the threat of the German assault. From inside Iron Duchess, Mallorie felt the vibration of gunfire through the hull, heard the groan of armor twisting under stress, and understood in a visceral way that every second of survival was a miracle. The German panzers advanced, then split, attempting a classic pincer movement. Robertson's tank commander instincts kicked in. Hold formation. Don't let them flank us. He signaled the other Matildas. Like a slow, deliberate wave, the British tanks adjusted, funneling the panzers toward prepared kill zones. The Germans were fast, but the Matildas were steady. Every second of hesitation in the German ranks allowed Robertson's guns to find their mark. A Panzer II appeared at close range, its commander confident. The gun fired. Mud exploded over the Matilda. Yet again, the British tank held. The Panzers were built for speed, but speed meant little against the relentless armor and steady gun of the Matildas. Private Mallorie stared in awe as the slow, squat machine before him shrugged off multiple hits that would have destroyed any other tank. Smoke began to rise from the battlefield, not from destroyed tanks, but from burning fields and ruptured hedgerows. The fog mixed with the acrid scent of gunpowder, creating a haze that seemed almost alive, swirling with the groans of engines and the cries of men. Artillery rounds streaked overhead, occasionally finding German recon vehicles, sending their crews scrambling. The Matildas advanced, each tank a battering ram against expectation. On the German side, frustration mounted. Panzer commanders shouted orders, their carefully rehearsed Blitzkrieg maneuvers disrupted by the resilience of these obsolete British tanks. One officer slammed a fist on the turret hatch, muttering curses in rapid German. They were accustomed to fear, to surrender, to the terror of overwhelming firepower. Yet here, in this rain-soaked field, the enemy stood firm. Sergeant Hawkins relayed sightings over the radio, his voice tense. 2 panzers down. Coordinates for artillery strikes. Hedgerow to the northeast. They're regrouping. Robertson nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. Every decision mattered. Every movement counted. One miscalculation could expose a flank. One misfire could end a man's life. Yet with each passing minute, the Matilda's confidence grew, their crew learning the rhythm of war through instinct and courage. Then, a new sound emerged above the clamor, the sharp, whistling roar of Luftwaffe bombers approaching. Stuka dive bombers streaked through the sky, screaming their menacing song. their shadowy forms casting fear across the battlefield. Soldiers ducked, tank hatches rattled, and Robertson's voice cut through the panic. "Keep moving. Don't give them a target." The Matildas surged forward, slow but unyielding, tracks cutting deep trenches in the mud, their guns blazing at the advancing panzers. One Stuka dropped bombs near the front line, shaking the earth violently. Trees splintered, mud sprayed, and men were thrown against armor. Yet the Matildas held firm, engines growling, guns ready. Hawkins called in defensive artillery fire, shrapnel tearing through the fog and sky, forcing the bombers to alter their trajectory. The German air assault was a calculated attempt to break the line, but the Matildas were steady, their crews disciplined under the roar of falling bombs. Amidst the chaos, Private Mallorie's gaze fell on a Panzer III attempting to flank the right. His stomach twisted, but training and adrenaline took over. "Here we go," he muttered, gripping the hatch. Robertson followed the movement with binoculars, signaling the Matildas on the right to adjust. The maneuver was executed with precision, a slow but unyielding shift that funneled the Panzer into a crossfire. The first Panzer commander in that trap realized the mistake too late. Iron Duchess's 2-pounder fired again. The shell struck, smoke and sparks erupted from the turret. The German crew scrambled, but could not regain control. Across the field, the remaining panzers faltered, their disciplined advance disrupted by the unexpected resilience of the British line. Men on both sides felt the shift. The German soldiers, accustomed to rapid, unchallenged victories, hesitated. Their hesitation allowed the Allies to exploit every opening, to turn every ridge, every hedgerow, into a defensive stronghold. The Matildas advanced slowly, deliberately, crushing expectation and momentum alike. In the command tank, Robertson's jaw tightened. He knew the battle had shifted. The Matildas had not merely survived the initial onslaught, they had stalled the German advance. But he also knew this was only the beginning. The Panzer divisions would adapt, the Luftwaffe would continue their attacks, and every second of hesitation could spell disaster. Then, a signal flare arced across the gray sky, illuminating the battlefield for a brief, stark moment. Smoke curled around the Matildas like ghostly fingers, revealing the stunned, frozen faces of German tank crews. The slow, lumbering British tanks had done the impossible. They had forced a pause in the feared Blitzkrieg. Yet in that moment of triumph, Robertson felt the weight of responsibility settle heavy on his shoulders. They had survived the first clash, but the Germans were not done. Not by a long shot. Every man in the Matildas understood the unspoken truth. Survival in this war was measured in moments, not hours, and each moment now carried the weight of history itself. Somewhere in the mist, a German voice shouted an order that would echo across the battlefield. "Bring the artillery forward. Don't let them advance another yard." The next wave was coming. The fog had begun to lift, revealing the battlefield in harsh detail. Craters scarred the fields like jagged teeth. Mud clinging to shattered hedgerows and burned-out vehicles dotted the landscape. The stench of gunpowder and scorched metal hung thick in the air. The Matildas advanced, slow but relentless, their engines growling like massive beasts navigating a war-torn jungle. Lieutenant Colonel Robertson leaned out of the hatch of Iron Duchess, binoculars in hand. The Panzer divisions had regrouped, forming staggered lines in a calculated attempt to overwhelm the British tanks. But the Matildas were ready. Every crewman understood their role. Every commander had memorized the terrain. This was no longer just a battle of firepower. It was a chess game played at the edge of human endurance. Private Mallorie's hands were raw from gripping the hatch, eyes scanning every ridge, every broken fence line for movement. Ahead, a Panzer II skidded into a shallow ditch, tracks spinning uselessly in the mud. Hawkins' voice crackled over the internal radio, tension palpable. "Artillery ready. Confirm targets on the eastern ridge. Watch the flanks. Robertson's mind calculated angles, distances, and momentum. One wrong move, and the Panzers could slice through their line like knives through butter. Then the first of the German artillery opened fire. Shells screamed overhead, splintering the earth and tearing into hedgerows. Mud and smoke sprayed across the Matildas' armor hulls. One round struck a nearby ditch, flinging water and debris over Private Mallorie, soaking him to the skin. The vibration shook the tank, but the Matilda held. Time slowed for a heartbeat as men realized the power of the armor beneath them. Slow, cumbersome, yet impervious to the standard German firepower of the time. "Steady!" Robertson barked, gripping the hatch with white-knuckled intensity. "Hold your fire until you see the opening." The Matildas adjusted, forming staggered firing lines to maximize coverage. The Panzers advanced cautiously, every commander aware that the lead British tanks were no ordinary machines. The first decisive shot came from Iron Duchess. The 2-pounder gun fired, tearing through the thin armor of a Panzer II attempting a flank. Smoke and sparks erupted from the German turret. The crew scrambled, but the tank was immobilized. Mallorie's eyes widened. "Did you see that?" he shouted to no one in particular, voice barely audible over the roar of engines and artillery. Hawkins responded tersely, "Don't celebrate yet, more coming." Another Panzer tried the same maneuver. Robertson anticipated it, signaling the Matildas on the right to adjust. A coordinated volley of shells tore into the advancing tank, flipping it onto its side. The ground shook as metal twisted, and fire licked the hull. For the first time, the German soldiers hesitated, their confidence eroding. The Luftwaffe returned to the fray. Stuka dive bombers shrieked overhead, releasing bombs that detonated around the Matildas. Mud and debris rained down. Tank crews ducked instinctively as the concussive blasts rattled the armor. Hawkins relayed coordinates for defensive artillery, and British gunners adjusted aim, peppering the advancing Panzers with shrapnel. Smoke and fog combined into a surreal haze, transforming the battlefield into a living nightmare of sound and motion. Amid the chaos, Robertson noticed movement in the far flank. A small squadron of Panzer IIIs attempted a high-speed maneuver through a recently flattened orchard. He ordered a flanking response. The Matilda shifted, tracks carving deep trenches in the mud, forming a deadly crossfire. The Panzers hit the British line at a tight angle, expecting to punch through. Instead, they were met with a barrage of shells from 3 angles simultaneously. Explosions erupted, and one Panzer tipped over, turret wedged into a ditch. The crew abandoned it in panic. Another was set ablaze after a precise shot from Iron Duchess. Smoke poured from the engine compartment, twisting into the morning sky. Robertson watched through binoculars, heart pounding. Each victory came at a cost, each second a gamble with lives on the line. Private Mallorie gritted his teeth as the tank shuddered under a near miss. Around him, the battlefield seemed alive with motion. Soldiers fired rifles from behind shattered hedgerows, artillery units adjusted aim mid-battle, and tanks maneuvered through the mud like living predators. The British line moved with terrifying efficiency, every action measured, every shell calculated. The Germans were not yet defeated. Panzer commanders shouted in frustration, rallying their units. Smoke from destroyed tanks clouded their vision. They underestimated the Matilda's resilience and the discipline of their crews. Robertson knew the Germans would adapt quickly, but he also knew they had bought themselves precious time. The moment of pause could decide the fate of Arras. Then came the crucial breakthrough. Robertson spotted a Panzer attempting a diagonal assault toward the left ridge. He signaled Iron Duchess and the adjacent Matildas to adjust. In a coordinated strike, 3 shells tore through the advancing German tank, immobilizing it instantly. Mud, smoke, and fire combined into a single chaotic eruption, marking the first visible fracture in the Panzer advance. The effect on German morale was immediate. Soldiers froze, unsure of how to respond to tanks they had assumed were slow, outdated, and fragile. The myth of Blitzkrieg invincibility cracked in the misty dawn. Robertson's voice cut through the internal comms, sharp and commanding. "Push forward. Keep the line tight. Show them we are not retreating." Private Mallorie felt a surge of adrenaline. Every shot fired, every maneuver executed, every second survived was a testament to the grit and courage of the crews. The Matildas, mocked as relics of a bygone era, now struck terror into the Panzer ranks. Robertson's eyes swept the field, calculating angles and anticipating enemy moves. Every action mattered. Every moment carried the weight of life and death. Amid the haze of smoke and fog, the sound of engines became a symphony of defiance. The Matildas moved in synchrony, slow and deliberate, yet impossible to stop. One by one, German tanks faltered under the combined fire. Smoke and fire marked the battlefield, painting a surreal tableau of courage and chaos. The Germans launched a desperate counterattack, sending 3 Panzer IIIs and a pair of Stukas in a coordinated strike. Robertson's tank commander instincts kicked in. Brace for impact. Adjust fire! The Matildas shifted, firing volleys that destroyed the lead tanks before they could reach the ridge. The Stuka's bombs fell short, finding nothing but churned mud and shattered hedgerows. For a moment, silence fell over the battlefield. Shells had paused, engines idled, and soldiers on both sides caught their breath. Robertson knew it was temporary. The Germans would try again. They always did. But for the first time, the Matildas had proven something undeniable: that courage, discipline, and steel could halt even the most feared military machine of the era. The crew inside Iron Duchess exchanged glances. Exhaustion etched on their faces, yet determination burned in their eyes. Private Mallorie realized something profound. They were part of something larger than themselves, a moment in history where the underestimated could strike back and change the course of battle. Then, from the far ridge, Robertson spotted movement. Another Panzer column approaching from the northeast. Their numbers were greater, their intent unmistakable. He tightened his jaw, eyes narrowing. The Matildas had survived the first engagement, shattered the myth of invincibility, but the storm was far from over. Every soldier felt it. The weight of the next wave, the tension of the coming clash, the knowledge that every maneuver, every decision, could be their last. Yet in that moment, amidst mud, smoke, and fire, the British tanks stood firm. The underdogs had struck back, and now the battlefield was theirs, if only for a fleeting, precious moment. The Germans were regrouping. The Matildas were ready. And somewhere in the mist, the first real test of endurance, strategy, and courage was about to reach its peak. The morning sun broke fully through the mist, casting the battlefield in sharp relief. Craters and churned mud stretched like scars across the fields. Smoke from burning panzers curled into the sky, painting streaks of gray against the pale blue. The Matildas moved with a slow, purposeful rhythm, each engine growl a heartbeat in the symphony of war. Lieutenant Colonel Robertson scanned the horizon. Another wave of German tanks was approaching from the northeast. Panzer IIIs and a handful of Panzer IVs, their guns glinting, rolled like steel predators over the broken terrain. Robertson's jaw tightened. The first engagement had proven the Matildas' resilience, but this was something more. An orchestrated push, a counter to the unexpected resistance that the British tanks had presented. Sergeant Hawkins relayed artillery coordinates over the radio, voice steady despite the tension. Concentrate fire on the eastern ridge. 3 targets marked. Suppress before they get into range. The Matildas adjusted formation, shifting slowly but with precision. Private Mallorie felt the vibration of the tracks through his feet, the subtle trembling of armor that was impossibly heavy yet somehow agile in the hands of disciplined crews. The first shots of the new engagement echoed across the fields. A Panzer III fired a 50mm round toward Iron Duchess. The shell struck the armor with a thunderous clang, throwing up mud and splintered wood from nearby hedgerows. Sparks flew, yet the Matilda did not flinch. Mallorie gripped the hatch tighter, heart hammering. Around him, the battlefield roared with artillery fire, the sharp crack of rifles and the low growl of engines. Robertson gave the order to fire. Iron Duchess's 2-pounder roared, striking the lead Panzer in the turret. Smoke and sparks erupted. The Germans hesitated, regrouping in confusion. The Matilda's slow but deliberate advance funneled the enemy into crossfires, hedgerows serving as natural choke points. Every maneuver was calculated, yet fluid, instinctive, the product of hours of preparation and nerves of steel under fire. The Luftwaffe intervened again. Stuka dive bombers screamed down from the sky, releasing bombs with precision aimed to disrupt the advancing Matildas. The earth shook as explosions ripped through the mud, sending clods flying over the tanks. Hawkins shouted coordinates for counter-artillery, each message cutting through the roar like a lifeline. Anti-aircraft units engaged where possible, tracer rounds cutting streaks through the morning haze, forcing the dive bombers to pull up at the last second. A critical moment arrived when a Panzer IV tried to exploit a gap on the left flank. Robertson's quick calculations guided the Matildas into position. 3 tanks converged in a tight triangle, opening fire simultaneously. The Panzer IV's engine caught fire, smoke rising in a thick column as the crew abandoned it. The battlefield seemed to hold its breath. The Germans, used to swift victories, now faced an unyielding line, a steel wall they could not simply push through. Private Mallorie felt a surge of adrenaline and disbelief. Moments ago, they had been ridiculed as obsolete. Yet here they were, turning the tide in real time. Every explosion, every ricochet, every thunderous impact told a story of resilience, of unexpected courage. Robertson's eyes swept the ridge. The Germans were still coming, still determined, but hesitation had begun to creep into their ranks. Artillery fire rained down on exposed Panzer positions. The British gunners, guided by Hawkins' steady hand, were relentless. Smoke and dust mingled with the morning light, creating a surreal, almost dreamlike battlefield where steel clashed and fire roared. Every Panzer immobilized was a victory not just for strategy, but for morale. The Matilda's presence had shifted the psychological battlefield as much as the physical one. The Germans attempted another maneuver, a sweeping pincer from the south. Robertson anticipated it, signaling the Matildas to adjust their staggered formation. Tracks tore through the mud as tanks pivoted, engines growling in synchronization. The Panzers advanced into the trap. British gunners waited. Then came the coordinated salvo. Shells struck simultaneously, tossing the first Panzer onto its side, disabling the second, and forcing the rest to retreat under fire. A stunned silence followed, brief but telling. The Matildas had stopped the enemy advance once more. Soldiers on both sides caught their breath, aware that every second counted. Every decision could tip the scales. The Germans muttered curses, their precision disrupted by the unexpected effectiveness of slow-moving tanks. The British, exhausted and exhilarated, realized that the impossible had become real. Robertson's gaze shifted to the horizon. Another column was forming, larger. He clenched his fists. The Matildas had bought time, had turned the tide temporarily, but the storm was not over. Every man inside these armor hulks understood that courage, discipline, and strategy were their only weapons against the tide of steel and fire advancing relentlessly toward them. Then, a German officer on a Panzer shouted, voice carrying over the battlefield, "Hold nothing back! Crush them!" The order was a challenge, a declaration, but the Matildas did not falter. Each tank moved as if part of a single organism, engines growling, Guns ready, crews alert. Private Mallorie felt the weight of history pressing down. The gravity of every decision magnified by mud, smoke, and fire. Smoke spiraled from the first destroyed Panzer, drifting across the battlefield like a banner of defiance. The fog, once an ally, began to lift entirely, revealing the scale of the clash. Scattered vehicles, shattered hedgerows, and the relentless advance of the Matildas. Robertson felt a rare, fleeting surge of hope. They had proven themselves. They had struck the Germans back. But the larger battle loomed ahead. And then from the far ridge, a fresh sound rose. A deep metallic rumble unlike the Panzer's usual engines. Robertson's heart sank. The Germans were bringing heavier armor into play. The tide of steel was about to shift once more, and the Matildas would face their ultimate test. Every soldier sensed it. The underdogs had momentum, but the storm was far from over. The next wave would determine if this defiance could hold, or if the line would finally break. By mid-morning, the battlefield near Arras had become a patchwork of mud, smoke, and steel. Craters gaped like open wounds. Twisted wreckage marked the paths of destroyed Panzers, and the scent of scorched metal lingered in the air. The Matildas, slow but relentless, moved forward with an eerie rhythm, engines growling like beasts tracking prey. Lieutenant Colonel Robertson peered through his binoculars, scanning the horizon. A new German assault had formed. A mix of Panzer IIIs, Panzer IVs, and armored reconnaissance vehicles, their guns glinting in the weak sunlight. This was no longer a probing attack. It was a calculated effort to crush the British armored line before it could solidify. He tightened his jaw, aware that every moment now mattered more than ever. Sergeant Hawkins' voice crackled over the radio. Targets locked. Eastern ridge and hedgerows. Artillery ready on your command. The coordination between the tank crews and artillery units was near flawless. Private Mallorie gripped the hatch, knuckles white, feeling the tremors of distant shells strike the earth. The battlefield had shifted from chaos to a tense, deadly choreography. The first shells of the German assault tore through the mud, striking hedgerows and craters with deafening force. One Panzer IV fired directly at Iron Duchess. The shell struck with a clang, metal groaning but refusing to yield. Sparks and smoke erupted, but the Matilda held firm. Mallorie felt the vibration through the hull, a reminder of the power contained within the armor. Robertson gave the order. Return fire. Target the advancing Panzers before they reach the ridge. Iron Duchess's 2-pounder cracked, tearing through the lead Panzer III. Smoke and flames erupted from its engine compartment, forcing the crew to abandon their vehicle. The following Matildas fired in rapid succession, creating a deadly crossfire that halted the German advance. The Luftwaffe rejoined the assault. Stuka dive bombers screamed overhead, releasing bombs intended to disrupt the British formation. Explosions rocked the field, mud and debris flying into the air. Robertson's internal comms rang with frantic instructions to adjust positioning. Hawkins relayed artillery coordinates with precision, directing counter-battery fire that forced the dive bombers to veer off their dive, disrupting their attack. Amid the chaos, a Panzer commander attempted to exploit a weakness on the left flank. Robertson anticipated the maneuver, signaling 3 Matildas to pivot and form a triangular trap. Engines growled, tracks ripped through the mud, and in a coordinated salvo, the tanks fired simultaneously. The Panzer IIIs were caught, one overturning into a ditch, another immobilized by a precise shot. Smoke and fire spiraled into the sky as the battlefield erupted around them. The German soldiers froze, uncertainty creeping into their ranks. The Matildas, once dismissed as obsolete and slow, had become the pivot point of the engagement. Robertson's eyes scanned the horizon. Every movement, every adjustment, every volley of shells mattered. The psychological impact of the British tanks was as significant as the physical destruction they wrought. Private Mallorie's heart raced. Each explosion, each cloud of smoke, each roar of engines was a visceral lesson in survival and strategy. He had never imagined being part of something so monumental. Around him, the Matildas moved with a terrifying precision, each tank complementing the others, forming a living wall of steel that repelled the German advance. The Germans were not defeated, they adapted. Another wave of Panzers approached, heavier, more coordinated. Panzer IVs led the charge, backed by reconnaissance vehicles. Robertson knew this would be the decisive moment. He signaled artillery units to concentrate fire and adjusted the Matildas' formation for maximum coverage. Every second, every decision could tilt the balance of the battle. The 1st Panzer IV fired. The shell struck Iron Duchess, skidding off the heavy armor with a metallic shriek. Sparks flew, but the tank remained steady. Robertson's voice cut through the comms. "Hold steady. Fire when ready. Don't waste a round." The Matildas responded, targeting the lead tanks with precision. One Panzer erupted in flames, the crew abandoning it immediately. Another tipped sideways into a crater, immobilized. The momentum had shifted. The Germans were no longer advancing with confidence. They hesitated. Robertson saw the subtle signs. Hesitation in the turret rotations, delayed firing, nervous glances exchanged between crews. The myth of Blitzkrieg invincibility had cracked. The Matildas, underestimated and slow, had transformed into a steel hammer, capable of halting one of the most feared armored forces in the world. Artillery fire rained down on the flanks, smoke and shrapnel twisting through the haze. The battlefield seemed almost alive, every explosion, every scream, every roar a part of the relentless rhythm of war. The Matildas advanced, crushing expectation and momentum alike. Their crews aware that each successful maneuver bought a few more minutes of survival. Then came the final test. A mixed group of Panzer IIIs and IVs attempted a coordinated assault on the ridge. Robertson gave the order to hold formation. The Matildas pivoted, engines growling, treads carving deep ruts in the mud. In a deadly, precise volley, the tanks fired simultaneously. The lead Panzers erupted in fire and smoke. Others faltered and were forced to retreat under artillery fire. For a moment, silence fell, broken only by the hiss of smoke and the low rumble of distant engines. The Matildas had held. The Germans had been pushed back, their confidence shaken. Private Mallorie looked around at the faces of his fellow soldiers, exhaustion etched on every line, but also awe and pride. They had done the impossible. Robertson allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. They had proven that courage, discipline, and steel could defy expectation. But he knew this victory was only temporary. Another wave would come. Another test would arrive. And yet, for the first time that morning, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the tide could be turned. Smoke rose from the wrecked Panzers, mingling with the early afternoon haze. The Matildas advanced slowly, deliberately, engines growling, guns ready. The battlefield was a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. And somewhere in the distance, the next wave of German armor began to form, signaling that the climax of this struggle was approaching. Afternoon sun cut through the lingering mist, casting long shadows over the shattered fields near Arras. Smoke from burning Panzers spiraled skyward, mingling with the pale haze, marking the battlefield as a monument to defiance. The Matildas moved forward, slow, deliberate, and unyielding. Each tank was a fortress, each crew a testament to discipline and courage. Lieutenant Colonel Robertson peered through his binoculars. The remaining German forces were regrouping, scattered and cautious. The fear in their eyes was subtle but unmistakable. They had anticipated an easy sweep, a blitzkrieg through northern France. Instead, they faced a line of tanks that should have been relics, machines dismissed as slow, weak, and obsolete, yet had become the axis upon which the battle turned. Private Mallorie wiped the mud from his face, his hands trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. Around him, the Matilda crews exchanged glances, brief nods of grim satisfaction. They had survived artillery barrages, dive bomber assaults, and relentless Panzer charges. Each victory had come at a cost, yet each had proven their machines, their strategy, and their courage. The battlefield was quieting, though the tension remained palpable. Sherman shells still landed on distant ridges. Artillery units adjusted aim, and scattered German infantry moved cautiously through ruined fields. Robertson's voice came over the internal comms, calm but commanding. "Hold positions. Watch the flanks. This is not the end, but today we made our mark." The German command hesitated. What had been expected as a swift, unstoppable advance was now a grinding, costly engagement. The Matildas had stalled the Panzer divisions, inflicted significant losses, and forced the Wehrmacht to reconsider their tactics. Fear, even if fleeting, had begun to seed itself among the previously confident German crews. Private Mallorie looked at Iron Duchess, its metal body scarred but resolute, a symbol of endurance. Around him, fellow soldiers had their own stories of survival and heroism. One crew had kept their tank firing even after a near-direct hit. Another had improvised repairs under shell fire. Each man and machine had contributed to the unexpected stand against the German advance. A low rumble in the distance signaled another German movement. Robertson's gaze tightened, but his tone remained steady. "Prepare, but maintain composure. Let them come. Our line is ready." Every man inside the Matildas knew the drill, their confidence tempered by the trials of the morning and early afternoon. They had turned fear into resolve, hesitation into strategy. The Panzer columns approached cautious, broken by the resistance. Tanks that had once struck fear now faced the unexpected. An armored line that did not retreat, that absorbed punishment, and responded with deadly precision. Robertson's tactics, combined with the resilience of the crews and the surprisingly effective armor of the Matildas, had rewritten the rules of engagement on this battlefield. Private Mallorie thought of home, of Leeds, and how far this world of mud, steel, and fire was from the bakery he once worked in. Yet here, in the heart of battle, he felt the full weight and honor of his place in history. The Matildas, once mocked, had become the linchpin of defense. Each enemy tank disabled was a story. Each retreating German column a testament to the unexpected power of determination and courage. The sun began its descent, golden light cutting through smoke and mist. Robertson allowed himself a rare moment to reflect. They had faced one of the most feared armored forces in modern warfare and had survived, had held their ground, had turned the tide, however temporarily. The legend of the Matildas was being forged in real time, in mud, fire, and courage. Artillery fire slowed, and the Luftwaffe began to withdraw. The German infantry fell back, regrouping cautious, aware that the British tanks had defied expectations. Robertson scanned the horizon one last time, seeing smoke from disabled panzers, soldiers tending to their wounded, and the quiet resilience of the men in his command. The battlefield, though scarred, was a testament to the improbable. Private Mallorie exhaled, feeling exhaustion mingle with pride. Around him, the other crews shared brief smiles, brief nods, small acknowledgments that words could not capture. They had been mocked, underestimated, and now, their courage and the steel of their tanks had earned them a place in history. Robertson's voice over the comms carried final instructions. Hold positions until nightfall. Evacuate the wounded. Maintain readiness. Today, we showed that courage and discipline can turn the impossible into reality. He knew that more battles awaited, that Arras was only one moment in the larger storm of war. But in this moment, they had rewritten the expectations of the battlefield. The Matildas, slow and underarmed compared to the feared German tanks, had proven themselves indestructible in spirit, implacable in resolve. They had stopped a blitzkrieg in its tracks, bought time for Allied forces, and etched their story into the annals of armored warfare. The men who had once laughed at these tanks now carried respect, awe, and gratitude for the courage beneath the steel. As dusk approached, the battlefield fell into a tense silence. Smoke drifted lazily from wrecked tanks, the groan of distant artillery faded, and the Matildas remained, hulks of resolute metal against the fading light. Private Mallorie, staring at the horizon, whispered to himself, "We did it! We really did it!" Around him, the others nodded silently, understanding that history had just been made in the mud of northern France. Lieutenant Colonel Robertson allowed himself a rare smile. They had faced the impossible. They had prevailed. And the story of the Matildas, mocked, underestimated, and slow, would live on, a testament to courage, discipline, and the unexpected power of the underdog.